Um, so I'm going to do a whistle-stop serendipity talk that doesn't tell you any more about me, other than that I'm going to be trying to draw the link between serendipity and creativity here. And I want to kind of start off by making the point, sorry for the cheesy photo, but the idea here was that serendipity is often looked at as this kind of luck-related phenomenon, and less is focused on some other aspects of it. So it's not about a needle in a haystack. It's much more than random luck. It's more than a happy accident, which apparently I was. It needs sagacity, and it's that kind of insight where I think that we see some relationships with creativity here. So this is the kind of outline. I'm still going to go with interactive. So do I have about 20 minutes? Is that right, Wendy?
Sorry, I was eating my lunch.
That's okay.
If you end up going to 25, that would be fine, Stephann. Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do here is jump into bits of this, but I want to keep the interactive components going. So I want to be asking one or two of you to share a serendipity story. So start thinking of one if you can. Ideally one with a creative outcome, but it doesn't have to be. I'll be telling you a creative professional serendipity story. We'll talk a little bit about the relationship between serendipity and creativity and the role of serendipity in your creative practice. And I'll run through some strategies from my research that creative professionals put in place to make their own luck, and maybe ask you a little bit about sharing your own serendipity strategies. So a quick grounding in some aspects of serendipity. I mentioned the sagacity was important. That's the light bulb. So when unexpected circumstances and an insightful aha moment result in a valuable unanticipated outcome. And it's possible to have different mixes or strengths of serendipity based on those components, so that a life-changing invention or some experience that means that you met the love of your life is a much kind of purer form of serendipity than another. In some research that we did looking at how serendipity works, those unexpected circumstances and insight help to make a kind of bisociation in your head, a mental connection. And most people kind of think of serendipity as stopping there, but actually the bits that help us to make our own luck are when we project potential value that can come from those unexpected circumstances and take some action to exploit that value, resulting in a valuable outcome. And this is an iterative process that involves some forward and backwards reflection to help us to think, what more could I do to create the most value out of these circumstances? So I'm going to tell you a story by one of the creative professionals that I interviewed, because I want to focus on the research that I've done with people who are creative. I had been granted an award to make an experimental music and film performance piece. I decided to base the piece on the figure of the fallen angel Lucifer, and had conducted research on peacock feathers as an emblem of Lucifer and the idea of the eyes as gateway to the soul. One day I was taking a journey on the London Underground from Angel to Highgate. As I went down the escalator at Angel, I noticed an advert that contained a large eye. So we're seeing some unexpected circumstances here. The image sparked a connection to the eyes on the peacock's feathers that I've been researching, and through that to the myth of Lucifer. So there's the connection. I then made several mental connections between the tube journey I was about to make and the legend of Lucifer's fall. For example, I was descending towards the underground tunnel just as Lucifer descended from heaven. I was also traveling from a station called Angel to one called Highgate via another called Archway. More connection building here. I'd written a version of the story of Lucifer's Fall that had direct parallels to the names of these stations, and I realized it wasn't too difficult to make a link between the station name and my research on the Lucifer myth. For some more insight here. I rapidly got the idea I could structure the whole piece around the structure of this journey, from the descent into the tube at Angel to the re-emergence at Highgate. So some projecting value going on. I adopted this structure for the piece, exploiting the value, which also featured a film installation made from footage from that particular journey. So some more value exploitation. The piece was given several performances and drew some very strong responses from audiences, as well as positive feedback from its commissioners and funders. So a valuable outcome there. So maybe there's time possibly for one of you, if you're happy to share a serendipity story of your own. Ideally, if you don't mind unmuting and jumping in. Remember, this is now a secure space, so we're not going to have people hopefully coming in and Zoom bombing us. So especially kind of, I'd like to, if we can, think of one that's resulted in a creative outcome or innovation or potential kind of innovation or creative outcome. Anyone want to jump in with their story? It's quite hard to think of them, but we all kind of have them. And I don't mind if you share a story that isn't creativity related. That's also totally fine. But I prefer one that is, if one springs to mind. It does normally take a minute or two of people thinking, how do I frame this? Take your time.
I'm happy to share one if that's
excellent.
helpful.
Thank you, Sarah.
It's not one of my own, but it's an example that we used at the Design Museum a lot, and it's about the building of the Sydney Opera House and those very distinctive sails. And Arup were the engineers that had to make this architecture stay up. And it was when and it was causing real problems. And it was when one of the engineers was having an orange with his lunch, and he sort of recognized that the orange segments and the structures of those would provide a structural integrity that could map to the challenge of getting this opera house to stay up. And that unlocked the problem for them.
And do you think you could say something more about what the problem was and what role a prepared mind might have played when this architect was looking at an orange and made that connection?
I think architects can dream up anything, but it's the engineers that need to make it work. And so the shape, I'm assuming with an engineering mindset, you think in 3 dimensions and you think structurally. Your training is part of that. And the problem of how do I resolve getting the shape so that it will stay up, that has been brewing in the back of the head for a long time. And to take that moment whilst eating lunch, whilst pondering this thing, to sort of recognize that within the shape of the sphere of an orange are wedges. And so from that wedge, you can map that up. So and I love how totally unrelated they are. But I think an engineering eye looking for structures and can recognize a wedge within a sphere is tuned into those sorts of connections.
Thanks, Sarah. Really, really great example. And I think that kind of reasoning by analogy might be something that can unlock some creativity. So that kind of leads us into what we think is the relationship between serendipity and creativity, because it's very clear that some kind of insight, and sometimes that insight can be unexpected, is something that's really important for creativity. Can anybody offer anything more about what they think could be a relationship between the two? And just jump in, unmute yourself and jump in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello, I'm Judy Waite from Winchester University in the UK. I was just really interested in the 2 examples that have just been given, your lovely Lucifer and that kind of, it was like a found art experience almost, in that you just took, you just kind of contained within whatever you were going to evolve with the experience that you had on that day. And then also the kind of the idea that the engineering mind is looking for structures. So it seemed to me that on both those examples, the mind is already pre-prepared. The mind already has opened itself up. You weren't thinking about what you were going to cook for dinner. You were thinking creatively. You were somehow already in that space. So I just think that's really interesting in terms of making sure that we're in that space and we've got a focus, and therefore then we can let the stuff come in, and we're kind of able then to make those almost like word associations that would be sort of Freudian or Jungian in terms of seeing where that takes us. You're doing it with almost visual or experience associations and just taking it the next stage and the next stage and suddenly it feels like magic, but actually all the magic had happened almost before you got on the train, I think. So yeah, that was my reaction. I love both those examples. Thank you.
Yeah, no, really good to hear that. And I think thinking about what the nature of the associations that are made and how you get in the space or the zone, and whether or not it's a focus or a lack of focus or a mix of those things, is quite important, because I think in the creativity literature, there's also a lot to be said for kind of stepping back and almost forgetting about what it is that you're working on, as I'll come to when I talk through the serendipity strategies, which is what we're going to get to now. So this was the fun part of this research. I interviewed 14 creative professionals, including an artist, composer, comedian, chef, choreographer, participatory theatre maker, filmmaker, which you heard the example from, a musician. And I asked them whether they thought there was anything that increased the likelihood of them experiencing serendipity. And so what came from this was 7 serendipity strategies that we could reflect on and perhaps leverage in terms of how they facilitate creative outcomes and innovation. So while I talk through these, reason about whether there's something that you think happened to you, or that you think happened in the creative realm, because I haven't done research on these in creativity, but they seem so familiar that I'd be very surprised if these were not also approaches for being creative. And in fact, there are links to the creativity literature that suggest it. So varying your routine is the first one. So the photographer continually took different routes to work each day, and when visiting a new city, set an arbitrary goal, such as visit a market, in order to see what happened along the way. She explained that putting something in action is important for creating opportunities for serendipity. Something unexpected happens to me, but then you have to put something in action too. You have to leave your house, you have to walk down the street, you have to look up, and then it happens to you. And so this has been talked about. Breaking routines has been talked about by Csikszentmihalyi, I can't pronounce the name, for enhancing personal creativity. He says that comfortable routines are great when they save energy for doing what you really care about. But if you're still searching, they restrict and limit the future. The next is being observant. So not just using your senses, keeping your eyes and ears open, but also regularly rehearsing them to stop and observe aspects of the environment, and adopting a curious and inquisitive approach towards the things that you notice. The composer said that being observant could be supported by attuning oneself to things of interest, so as to notice triggers in the environment related to those interests. What gives rise to serendipity is a preparedness to being open to seeing conjunctions. Some conjunctions slap you in the face, he said, and you can't ignore them, but not all of them do. So being observant. This is the stepping back part, the making mental space, putting yourself in an environment and adopting a mindset that allows you to kind of step back from the things you're working on, to put them out of your mind, in inverted commas, in order to allow that aha moment to happen when it's ready to. It's that kind of incubation of an idea. The composer said that a busy lifestyle and a full mind meant that he was less likely to have the space to pick up on things. And the amateur games designer said that being closed off to serendipity, maybe when stressed or in a bad mood or other pressures, made it less likely to happen. The composer refers back to making mental space and refers back to that fallen angel example that I talked about. I think being fallow is very, very important. In my example, when I was going down the escalator at Angel, I wasn't ostensibly thinking about the piece. I was going to a rehearsal. So it was a sort of downtime, really, even though I was thinking about it all the time. It's like you feed a load of stuff into your system, and then you almost have to let go in order for it to speak. Making mental space. Relaxing your boundaries, that's me trying mopani worms in South Africa. The visual artist said, if you have rigid boundaries between areas of knowledge or areas of the world, whether intellectually or physically, you'll cut off certain possibilities. Even literally, if you obey no entry signs every time you see them, having a healthy disrespect for boundaries is a pretty important attitude for encouraging serendipity. Another was drawing on previous experiences. So I had a rather lame example in this before, and then yesterday I just thought I've got such a good example. When I first learned that I loved traveling, I ended up in Vancouver Airport on a flight that I didn't realize was going to stop en route in Honolulu on the way to where I was headed to Sydney. And as I got to the bag drop desk, I went to check in my bag, and the bag check-in attendant said, are you going to Hawaii then? I said, no, I didn't know the plane stopped there. And the attendant said, yeah, I just came back actually. I stayed right on Waikiki Beach in this lovely hotel that was really cheap, and it was just such a good holiday. He goes, it's really a shame that you're not staying there. I said, yeah, I would have loved to if I'd kind of known, but also I've got a really restrictive ticket. I didn't pay a lot of money for it. It's not going to work. And this baggage attendance guy just ripped up my ticket and wrote me a new one and said, this is the name of my hotel that I stayed in. Enjoy Honolulu. And when this next, when the next time I ended up on a layover between the US in Iceland, because I was flying Iceland Air, I just thought, you know what, why don't I just try? So I got up and said, look, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I'd really love to see some of your country. So could I come back on a later flight? And there you go. An hour later, I was sitting in the Blue Lagoon. So the visual artist said, serendipity is often meaningful because it aligns disparate elements, but you have to have access to those elements in some way. And that's a function of memory, storage, sensitivity, and self-archiving of memory. The amateur games designer described drawing on experience from other games that he designed by taking an existing idea and turning it on its head. This is something that I think Steve Johnson talks about in the creativity realm, keeping a personal digital archive of interesting quotes and periodically revisiting them and looking for those associations between them. That's also in line with something Csikszentmihalyi has said, where creative professionals, and we kind of know that creative professionals often write diaries or keep notebooks to support and reflecting on previous experiences, and in order to make those experiences less fleeting, so that the most memorable, interesting, and important events are not lost forever a few hours after they occurred, says Csikszentmihalyi. The next strategy I observed is looking for patterns. You can probably see some patterns here related to what time it was and what was happening to all the internal flights at Delhi Airport. Apparently, fog is a thing at Delhi Airport quite often. The participatory theatre maker told me there was a 90-year-old potter that she had worked with who made big thematic statements. He said to her, people think there's patterns in the world. There isn't, it's chaos. But what we're here to do is look for patterns. That's our purpose. The filmmaker described the tendency of wanting to find patterns in things, patterns of meaning on a physical level, just patterns in the way that people move around. And the composer said serendipity was fundamentally about being prepared to see alignments and construct meaning from them. It's almost as if one is prepared to see alignments. And it's not necessarily for me that the alignments are objectively meaningful, but that we can extract or construct something meaningful from them. And finally, the final one was seizing opportunities. So it's not enough for those unexpected circumstances to lead to an aha moment of insight. Perhaps the most controllable and leverageable aspect of serendipity might be in turning those unexpected circumstances into a valuable outcome. So I turned up at my hotel in Laos, which is in the background, in a really rural part, having missed my flight out there. And I'd missed the opportunity that I had arranged to go and volunteer teaching English in a local primary school. And when I got to the hotel, I asked the manager what it was that I could do there. And they said, well, most things are the other side of the river and the boat's leaving like right now. It's your only chance to get over there. I got on the boat, talked to the other guest, the only other guest at the hotel you see in the picture. Turns out that she was going to her last day of teaching at the local primary school. And I didn't really need to mention what had happened to me. She just said, why don't you come along? Like they'll be happy as long as we go a little ahead of time, just so that they can check you out. They'll be happy for you to join in. And of course, you can see how the story ended. For many creative professionals, a valuable outcome is a creative or innovative one, but it sometimes involves taking often risky opportunities. The installation artist described buying several figurines to act as a sculptural audience for an exhibition piece she was developing after a visiting artist came to her studio and paid attention to a figurine of a cat on her windowsill. But she realized that building prototype artworks to seize these opportunities was often expensive, and said, I'm prepared to have a go and try things, but you're looking at a room full of stuff that probably cost me £1,500 over the last 2 months, and there's nothing telling me I'm going to get my money back from that, or indeed any satisfaction on any level. So these kind of investments of time, money, and effort are often high risk and high reward, and they may not often result in a valuable outcome, but when they did, the benefits outweighed the investment cost. So I'm probably going to try and take 5 minutes of interactivity. Is that okay, organisers? So I probably will run to 35.
We're just trying to work out who we've got coming up on all the different places and whether it'll work. But yeah, let's
I think we can definitely take until 35, and then
okay.
we move on. And I'm sorry.
So how about, and also just stop me at any point if because I can go on for hours. And yeah, awesome. All right. So maybe time for some reflection then on, do any of these practices resonate with you in terms of creative practice? And do you have any serendipity strategies, maybe some that have led to creative outcomes or innovation? So either the relevance of the existing ones, which you see here on the screen, or your own serendipity strategies that you apply in a creative context. Okay, anyone want to kick us off?
I could, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Great. So hi, thank you so much. My name is Yusuf. I think I really resonate with the relaxing your boundaries idea, and I've just been thinking about it, and I wanted to sort of expand on that. And I'm a person who does a lot of art, music, and stuff. And so I think as creatives and artists, people tend to very much be attached to their own vision and their idea of, you know, what their project wants to be and what it should be, and might not take a lot of advice, or, you know, people refuse to talk about the projects and stay quite secretive. But if you relax that boundary, it seems like something that, like, you know, is very obvious, but hearing someone else's input and their way of thinking about your project that you had not thought of at all before can really take whatever you're making to the next level. And I think that's really important and something we should really focus more on.
Yeah, I agree. I see that happening in academia quite a lot, where people are sometimes a little bit cautious for free and open sharing of ideas. And I'm thinking, like, who really is right at the intersection of what you're interested in, where you say something and they're going to take it and run with it? And, you know, maybe I'm a little bit utopian and naive there, because I do recognize that that plagiarism does happen, but I feel that without idea sharing this, and also across disciplines, so across like you say, Yusuf, I think it's different perspectives that can really get you thinking in different ways, and often that can be achieved across different disciplines. Anyone else want to say something about either one of these that resonates, or your own serendipity strategies that might or have led to creative outcomes or innovation?
Yeah, for me, it's very simple. You just avoid the word should at that point. Just whenever there's something you should do, you don't do it. And that is it. It works every time almost if you do that. So yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of hard, because you're always reconciling the what is expected of me and my role. You know, it's like I always say to myself, I really should just not go to these meetings that don't give me value, and build in time to just talk to other members of the Serendipity Society, or I really should just not play ball with the stupid admin tasks that I'm being given. And often I chicken out of that, and so I do them, but I do them in a low effort, low cost kind of way that allows me to focus my time on the interesting stuff. And I think it's that balance to strike. It's like the do you do you obey the no entry signs? Well, sometimes I do when I think it's important, but not always, because sometimes disobeying is showing that healthy disrespect for boundaries. Anyone else want to jump in? One last one.
Yeah, I think that in general people are very hung up on outcomes, whereas artists are kind of they kind of get into the process, and really artists are used to playing around and just doing stuff for the fun. And that's one of the possible ways of being more creative and finding it serendipity.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget the first day of my master's education where I asked how a particular module would be assessed, and the lecturer went off on a diatribe of why that wasn't the approach that somebody should take when they're trying to master a subject, and that it was not about how you'd be assessed. It wasn't about the outcome. It was about what you gain from the process. And I think it's only now that I kind of think about that when I think about doing the research that I really love. You know, I think with this research, my colleagues thought I was a little bit out there with saying I'm just going to interview creative professionals for and then I'm going to submit it to an information science and technology journal because I'm going to look at the implications that has for the design of interactive systems, which is actually my day job. I think that's it. It's about valuing process, and then the outcome comes naturally, hopefully. I am going to stop there because it's 12:35. Thank you all for the interactivity. There's some more work here on serendipity that we've done, which I haven't touched here, and the citation for the serendipity strategies work that I have touched. Thank you very much. What I would say is, so I haven't been around at all the times that we've had disruption in the previous channel, but I would say if anybody has felt distressed or concerned, and sorry if this is, you know, if I'm trivializing something here, but if anybody needs to talk about any of this, please reach out to the organizers, because they've said that they really would like to hear from you if there's any issues. So please reach out if you need to discuss any of that. I'm hopeful that there was nothing there bar a bit of stupidity, so hopefully people haven't been affected by this, but I did want to make that point on behalf of the organizers. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you
Stephann.
so much.